Hello and good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Karen Coney. I'm the director of the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, and delighted to present to you this afternoon this program called It Happened Tomorrow, Probabilities, Predictions and Prophecies. The title of our program is borrowed from René Clair's cheerfully silly comedy It Happened Tomorrow from 1944. Early on in the film, the tottering old newspaperman whose name is Pop Benson, whom we haven't yet recognized at that point as the secret emissary from beyond, pronounces that time is an illusion. And on this day, September 11th, few gestures seem more appropriate and more widely celebrated than an acknowledgement of time. We recognize the passage of time in so many different ways, through personal reflections on memory, loss, and change, all the way to urban initiatives on rebuilding, revitalization, or rededications. And so we too wanted to talk about time today. We have been very fortunate to have two exceptional artists as the 2009-2010 Vera List Center Fellows, Lin Lam, here on the far left, and Lana Lin on my side. They're also known as Lin and Lam. During this period, 2009 and ongoing, many of our programs at the Vera List Center focused on the larger subject of speculating on change. Lin and Lam have responded to this agenda with very precise questions. What does change mean? How and when does it happen? How do we perceive it? And they have actually taken it much further and added additional questions. What would it mean to master change, to prepare for it? Can one anticipate change and be ready for it? How can we make meaning of what happens to us? The artist's response is an online archive, Change Encounters, that gathers an assortment of cultural and historical predictive devices. Being online means many things. One is that it immerses the participants in an apparently interactive, communicative cyber community. Two is that rather than suggesting a solid and permanent construction of knowledge, it posits knowledge as an unstable, subjective, and generative or changing entity, something we experience with particular urgency on this anniversary and its discussions of freedom of speech and religion. The first part of our afternoon is dedicated to Change Encounters, and it goes live as we speak. It reaches us here and thousands of people outside. After a conversation with Lin and Lam, where they will present and, I hate the term, but walk us through the project, a stellar group of discussants will present their take on predictions of the future to us. And in advance, I'd like to thank them very much. Patricia Clough, Orit Halpern, Mitch Horowitz, and Daryl Rutkin. I'd also like to thank Annie Shaw, the Senior Office Assistant at the Vera List Center, very much. And for exceptional and unfailing support, I'd like to acknowledge the Vera List Center's Advisory Committee. This committee makes many of our programs possible and is responsible for this extraordinary initiative of the fellowship program. In particular, J.K. Brown, Andrea Geyer, Margarita Gutmann, Sina Najafi, and Lydia Matthews steered this year's fellowship deliberations in an excellent direction. So thank you all for being here, and the word now goes to Lin and Lam. Thanks.
Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks to Karen Coney, Orit Halpern, Annie Shaw, and all the other panelists for organizing and participating in this event, and to the Vera List Center for their support of our work. So as Karen just described, during our fellowship period, we investigated the varied ways people envision the pleasures and dangers of change. As you might expect, this was and is a broad topic, which is why today we wanted to concentrate on the aspects of change that are oriented toward the future as a condition of potential knowability. But since the future is always contingent upon the present and the past, the utopian promise of precognition is ever problematic.
The front door is open. The front door is open.
Around 30 seconds.
You know how blind I am without it.
Look at me. Look at me. Positive for Howard Marks. Who's Marks? By mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division. I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin, take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes.
I didn't do anything. Sarah!
Dubin married his head.
We did not intend for this event to coincide with 9/11, but this infamous date raises the stakes of the question, what if we had known? Spielberg presents us with a dystopian vision of what precognition might look like if perfected and optimized by the state, where individual will and spontaneity is preempted by a totalitarian surveillance. The pre-crime division turns premeditation into criminality. The act itself becomes superfluous. The longing for prescience troubles a secure relationship between present, past, and future. Responsibility weighs heavily upon these questions. Where responsibility and speculation appear to be at odds, we find them again and again entangled. War, finance, politics, real estate are all driven by speculation, all the while accompanied by the imperative for responsible behavior. And yet all too often, responsibility tends to be thrust out belatedly as a kind of accusation, an axe raised in the air. Who did not heed warning signs? Who did not safeguard rights and privileges? Or worse, who is friend or foe? It is not clear whether this sort of reaction does more than secure certain people's positions at the expense of others. Our project was initiated during a heightened global climate of risk, though a perpetual climate of risk appears to have become the norm. We want to ask, why is change configured as such a threat, and how can we hope for a better future for humanity?
So, what has brought you to Madame Selma?
Well, can you really know everything about me just by looking at my hands?
The poems tell me all.
I would just like for you to be able to tell me, why am I going to be doing the things I'm going to be doing?
Madame Selma, she's a poem writer, not a psychologist.
It's just, I think I've somehow caught a glimpse of my own future, myself. And I see me doing things that just seem so out of character for me. I mean, these are things that not only do I not want to be doing, but I can't even imagine myself capable of doing. And yet, there I am. I'm doing them.
Mister, please, you're hurting me.
I know. And I'm sorry. But you're a fortune teller.
No.
You should have seen this coming.
We choose this clip as it concisely depicts the paradox of prediction. The homicidal maniac articulates the desperate urge to understand the motivations behind his future acts, while the unfortunate fortune teller embodies the failure to fulfill her professed clairvoyance. The tragic frailty or gruesome irony of our human fate is to be continually caught in this bind of desiring the unknown and yet never being capable of capturing the future. Prediction compels us to integrate the future imagining with the present moment. future prediction is shaped by the present moment, whether it is marked by security and stability or disorder and distress. The capacity to aspire, as Arjun Appadurai asserts, is critical to the possibilities for the less privileged to envision a future and overcome the present conditions. Our project takes up some of these lofty questions, but in deference to their vast scope, our aims are more modest and even playful. We take our cue from the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of divination, and which is at once a grand cosmological philosophy addressing order and disorder and in the universe, and a literary work that is at once poetic, mysterious, quirky, or at least in the translation that we have seen, and intended to put it into everyday use. Conceive, as Karen Cooney mentioned, in response to the Vera List Center's theme, speculation on change encounters, our project offers multiple complementary and conflicting vantage point on the nature and the process of change. To speculate derives from the Latin, and pardon my Latin, speculat, meaning observe from a vantage point. Our website is an assemblage that brings together different perspectives, actively producing a multidisciplinary of which change is at the core. In addition to more conventionally accepted sciences, including neuroscience, anthropology, and economics, we are also interested in the less conventionally accepted practices such as financial astrology, the use of psychics and oracles, and futurism. Science that pushes the boundaries of what is knowable and practical, such as cybernetics, contribute much to our understanding of the spectrum of change.
Judith Butler describes Michel Foucault's understanding of self-transformation as prompted by a form of knowledge that is foreign to one's own. In this spirit, we bring together and against one another knowledges and practices that form a prison, casting different angles of light upon the state of our economy, psychic life, and physical surroundings. With Obama's slogan receding yet still resonating into the second year of his administration, we wonder, what kinds of change can we still believe in? Who or what might be called upon as agents for change? And what the ramifications of a change are for whom? These inquiries contemplate the conditions for constructive future thinking within a climate of environmental, economic, and psychological instability, and set the stage for how we might anticipate today what is at stake tomorrow. We want to share with you some of the questions we posed in the interviews we conducted, because often in the tradition of documentary, it is the questions that are elided, literally edited out. Questions are then inferred through the response, and this tends to put the weight upon the interview subject. We wish to make evidence our process of inquiry. The questions we ask influence the kinds of responses we receive and say a lot about our own position. We learned in the process of asking questions about what is invested in questioning and the kinds of questions that can be asked. Certain conditions allow us to ask questions, and questioning opens up the possibilities for a response. The only question that was common to all the interviews we conducted was, what does change mean from your particular disciplinary perspective? How does your field define change? This returned responses ranging from, music does not define change, it is change, to astrology does not so much define as describe change, to change is one of those concepts that's so fundamental to neuroscience that it isn't even necessarily defined. The neuroscientist went on to say that change is part of the definition of learning. We devised questions specifically geared to the concerns of each interviewee, such as, what is meant by the performative nature of the circulations of capital, and how does this intersect with the social? How is change related to capitalism? What kinds of financial mechanisms have been developed to predict change? What presumptions lie behind market mechanisms in terms of, for instance, how the public is conceived, or presumptions about the market itself as rational or irrational? How does risk and vulnerability figure in your line of work? what kinds of risks are involved in change?
During the 2008 pre-election fever, candidate Obama consulted with a team of behavioral scientists whose studies on predictive behavior contribute to some of his effective campaign strategies. Obama subsequently appointed one of these behavioral economists, Cass Sunstein, as his administrator of the White House Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. During that election period, the kind of change Sunstein and Obama believe in issues from well-meaning, educated people in power who gently nudge the public towards making the choices that are deemed best for them. Change from this perspective rejects the classical economic model, which views society as rational, acting in ways consistent with knowledge and intelligence. But repeated financial crisis has proven that more often people behave irrationally. Being fellows at the Vera List Center has enabled us to access a wider range of experience and perspective, both within the new school, current and former faculty and students alike, as well as outside of it. For example, Benjamin Lee, professor of anthropology and philosophy here at the New School, discusses the philosophy of libertarian paternalism that contributed to the policy aimed of the Obama administration. Former capital markets trader Robert Wurznitzer contemplates that we can and should want. Robert Wurznitzer contemplates what we can and should want from a financial market, taking into account its costs and benefits globally and at the level of the individual, the corporation, and the state. And through Lopamudra Banerjee, my apology, who is the current chair of the economics program at the Eugene Lang here, and studies catastrophe and violence against at-risk populations, we become aware of the higher cost of change to those who are most vulnerable to its negative effects.
I think Obama, his administration is quite interesting in that regard because he's basically been influenced by the third generation of the Chicago School. Not the Milton Friedman people, but the people in law and economics, Posner and his friend Cass Sunstein, whom I knew quite well at Chicago, and Richard Thaler and Stephen Levitt, Freakonomics, kind of representing a new design influence mentality. Nudge, the book by Thaler and Sunstein, constantly invokes the idea of designing an architecture, a decision architecture, nudging people in directions of choices so that the aggregate effect of their choices is to move you in a direction. That, I think, represents very much a new kind of thinking that has been quite influential among younger people now. It's a combination of a little bit of anthropology, a little bit of microeconomics, sociology, directly into policy implications. As an alternative to these sort of big top-down models, kind of Roosevelt-like model. Cass was very influenced by Roosevelt, so it's interesting that his foray into behavioral economics has moved in this nudge direction. At the same time, the nudge direction is supposed to be sensitive to the kind of libertarian impulses that seem very popular now among some conservative circles, but nudging them in directions that we might consider liberal. This has, again, emerged as another area where the issue of responsibility is being redefined. Not an area that the old left finds very palatable, but certainly a direction that is now popular in the United States.
When I traded, I worked on an institutional trading desk, so my customers were large pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, corporations, nation states. That's who we were dealing with. And then the other side of investment banking is the retail stockbroker who deals with the public, deals with the individuals who are buying stocks and buying municipal bonds for their own portfolio. And that the distance between these two spaces couldn't be greater. And so, I don't know, I'm at least toying with the idea that perhaps what we need to know is occurring on that other debased retail space. In other words, what does a normative financial system look like? And how does it address the needs of human beings? And how does it, move out of this space of experts that is opaque, that is incomprehensible to common understanding, yet its very foundations are so understood. So I think it's an idea I'm thinking about playing with it. If we're going to find a way out of this crisis, I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to start asking, what is a normative financial system? What purpose do we want it to serve? Nobody's asking these questions. Right? What does it do? Yes, we need the distribution of capital. Yes, we need people to have access to capital and access to banking. But in what terms? An individual would never, in 20 million years, need a credit default swap. It just would not occur to them to have a need to use that. So if you can't trade them with individuals, why do you trade them on an institutional level on behalf of individuals? Might be one question. I think we need to start looking in spaces we haven't looked at before. I think by continuing to ask the very people who produce this crisis to find solutions is a recipe for disaster. I'm really reluctant to talk about the crisis even as a crisis anymore, because at what point does it stop becoming a crisis and become normal? I mean, credit markets have not repaired themselves. It's not about greedy bankers. It's not about a misunderstanding or a mismanagement of risk. It's not about the capitalist class overwhelming the working class. At the same time, it's about all of those things, but it's not about any single one of those at any given moment.
You had asked me how is the notion of risk associated with this change? And I started by saying that when I'm talking about change, I'm talking about violent departure, deviation from norm. And risk, by definition, at least in my discipline in economics, is defined as the likelihood of loss. This loss factor is captured by the deviation from a state of being, and the likelihood is captured by probability of occurrence of some cause which will lead to this deviation from the norm. So when I'm talking about risk, I'm talking about what is this probability of deviation, and how is this probability a factor of a random shock that occurs in nature, and also in the presence of people who are already vulnerable. And so these people are already exposed to this shock, and which will eventually lead to the deviation for this group of people. So I'm talking about risk, which is a factor of both something which is exogenous, random, or happening outside the system, together with something which is already the possibilities of this deviation, which are already hidden within the society and which get exposed when this kind of shock occurs from outside the world, outside from the environmental system to the social system. So I'm talking about a compound factor of the probability of change in nature and probability of change within the society, the hidden possibilities that are already always there. For big changes, real changes to come, there are big risks and big visions to be thought about. And in the presence, there are going to be damages, and there are going to be shocks. But one should be ready for that if one is really thinking in terms of change. You cannot use the instruments of retaining stability to bring about change.
To continue with the questioning, if we can say that social change is premised upon the ability to make informed decisions, how might cybernetics and information and computer theory have impacted or impact the political potential for decision making? What is the difference between advocacy and activism? What are the differences in what can be achieved through them? How does the brain process change? How would you describe the psychic conflicts that people experience around the notion of change, and how do you imagine people surmount those conflicts? Maggie Zellner, a neuropsychoanalyst, talked about the phenomenon of people urgently seeking change and yet remaining fixed in their habitual patterns because they have something at stake in the familiarity of their own misery.
It seems like as individuals and as a species that we have several competing instincts. So on the one hand, it seems like we have a very strong instinctual predisposition towards hierarchy, territoriality, and that as a species, if we don't get a grip on that, we are really going to deplete the planet and kill each other. It'll be the end of the story. On the other hand, though, we also have hardwired in us the capacity for altruism, empathy, really caring about other people. So that balances out that instinctual competitiveness. And then finally, on a brain level, we do, as human beings, have the capacity to imagine the future in a way that other species don't. For me, it's sort of a question of which of those tendencies are going to win in the long run. Because on the one hand, it seems like we have a very strong instinctual tendency to want to protect those who are close to us and be competitive with those who seem different from us. And that those all seem to lead us down a path of destruction. But on the other hand, since we have the capacity to represent the future to ourselves, because we have a much more elaborated prefrontal cortex than any other species has, we do have the capacity to make conscious decisions to change our behavior. And it seems like really literally at this time in history that there's just a huge struggle between those dynamics.
How do you factor in unpredictability and unintended consequences in your practice? Is this part of a strategy? How is perception a site for speculation? Is there a politics and an ethics for designing for the future? We uncover some amazing advertisement projecting life, what life would be in the year 1845. Oh.
It seems like...
I think it switched. I think it moved.
Okay.
So we're going to skip to that.
There it is.
Yeah. So here's the cannonball for airborne passengers. We don't need windows any protecting us. And here's the year 2000. I'm sorry for the students out there. We're 10 years behind with information access this way. And here is an advertisement for what life would be like in the year 2012, which is about a year and a half from now. And of course, to be tasted with the bar of chocolate. Right. And here's Zenith, Crystal Gazer post-war stream, a radio receiver complete with a political candidate selector, which is at the bottom there, that almost look like your CD stacks, a daily newspaper dejector, and the kitchen sink. This ad is from the Mexican American Review, 1944. The Great Christopher motto is introduced in honor for the discovery of America by Christopher Columbus, of course, and the Zenith company offers a liberal trade-in allowance for your old radio for the price of $14.92. We can't begin to do justice to unpack this one with you here with the limit of time. So I will continue with the questions. How is the public mobilized through collective play and collective intelligence? How would you describe the relationship between chance and change? What does it mean to get good, quote unquote, chance operation? Here is the poetic rendition of chance through the reading of Stephen Mallarmé's poem, A Dice Thrown Never Knows Chance, by a chorus of 6 women. I think there's a switch around.
Oh.
I don't see it.
Can you get out of the...
I can get out and look for it. My apologies. I lost it.
15? There.
No.
7?
I think we skipped it.
Oh.
No, I think we skipped it.
Okay. Is it on your desktop or no?
I think it's on
Just
my
skip it?
desktop. Yeah, skipped it. So. Yes. What would you like to do?
Desktop, or should we skip it?
Should we skip it? I want to play it. Bear with me. It's here.
There it is.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Dice thrown never will indulge chance. Dice thrown never, when even indeed cast in circumstances of eternity from the depths of shipwreck, be that the abyss,
blanched, slack-wise, raging, slant, glides despairingly even, some wing, its own, beforehand, fallen back from incapacity to trim the flight, and covering what foams, cutting back what soars, most inwardly resumes. The shadow buried within the deep by this alternative sail, to the point of fitting to wingspan, its yawning deep, insofar forth as the shell of a ship, listed to one or the other board,
the master,
beyond old-time cipherings where the maneuver with age forgotten, risen, inferring, once he was wont to grasp the helm from this conflagration at his feet, from the unanimous horizon that there readies itself, works itself up, and mingles with the fist which would grip it.
False manner instantly dispersed in mist, which laid a limit on infinity.
it was worse,
of
Doris. The
stars,
number might exist.
Otherwise than hallucination of scattered spray,
Might it begin and might it end?
welling up, as denied and bounded on show at last in some outpouring rarely spread, might
it be counted?
counted. Evidence of a tot of the sum, however little one might it illuminate.
It would be worse.
Nor more nor less indifferently, but as much
Chance.
drops the quill, rhythmical suspending of the feet to bury itself in the original spray, whence but lately whose frenzy sprang as far as a peak, blasted by the identical neutrality of the Gulf.
Nothing
Nothing
of the memorable crisis, or might have the event come about of itself in view of every result. No. Human
Will take place.
an everyday uplifting pours out absence.
But place.
Commonplace plashing below of waves as for dispersing the empty act abruptly, which otherwise by its lie had founded perdition in these reaches of the vague, in which all the real dissolves.
Accepted at the summit, perhaps as far as one place
fuses with beyond, outside the interest for its part signaled in general by such obliquity, on such declivity of fires, towards that should be septentrion, also north,
A consolation.
cold of forgetfulness and disuse, not so much as to not enumerate on some vacant and spurious surface the shock successive, starwise of total count in the making, waking, doubting, rolling, shining and musing before halting at some latest point which crowns it. All thought utters dice thrown.
People say you can't time the markets, but we can and do market time. Henry Weingarten, a financial astrologer, remarks. We ask, how would you expand upon the notion of marketing time? Your practice is sometimes referred to as market divination. Would you characterize it as analysis, prophecy, or prediction?
You want tomorrow's news today. And of course, we can't do that perfectly, but we can do it in the general sense and sometimes in a specific sense. Certainly in terms of probabilities, high probabilities, low probabilities, etc. So what they really want to know is, for example, when markets are going to be up, what sectors are going to outperform. In other words, what allows you to make money in the stock market.
The financial forecaster voices our common wish to know tomorrow's news today, a wish of special intensity for the journalism profession that prides itself on its timely precognition. The film from which we appropriated the title of today's event presents a classic rendition, as Karen mentioned, of the newsman's dream come true. And typically it's a case of be careful what you wish for. Oh, you have to go back.
Yeah.
Sorry, our keynote got a little out of order.
There's nothing as bad as yesterday's news. Yesterday's news? You no imagination, young man. News is what happens. What's the difference whether it happens 50 years ago or tomorrow?
You mean will happen tomorrow? That's what I want, Pop. Tomorrow's newspaper. How much? You call this a month of May? Last night fog, cold this morning. How goes it, Joe?
Not so good. They're looking for a job. You mind if I take a look at your paper?
I haven't got one.
Sure you have one. Here in your coat.
Evening News, that's last night's paper.
I don't mind. It's the want ads I'm after. This ain't last night's paper. It's today's.
No, Joe. Today's Evening News hasn't gone to press yet. Must be last night's.
What day is today?
Wednesday.
But this says Wednesday.
Wednesday? They must have made a mistake. What day's today?
Wednesday, all day.
Snow. It didn't snow yesterday, did it? No. Unseasonable snowfall, 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't see any snow, did you?
How could I? There wasn't any.
Yes, it's Wednesday the whole day. And what a day. Snow in May.
Eight o'clock in the morning. What time is it?
Can't you see for yourself?
Just go to the...
Yeah. I'm going to just, for the interest of time, I'm going to skip. War and governance and the need for the means of prediction go hand in hand, which is why it's not surprising to find that historically heads of states, including Napoleon, Hitler, and Reagan, depending on oracles to capture the future through accurate prediction that would authorize and consolidate their power. It is worth noting that when Reagan was governor of California, it is rumored he signed a legislation that would allow the licensed astrologers to practice their trade and remove them from the categories of being fortune tellers. J.P. Morgan has often been quoted as saying, millionaires don't use psychics, but billionaires do. So the image that you're seeing here is the palm of Napoleon Bonaparte, and that is his crest on the wrist there. So we're gonna switch to go to the website very quickly, changing counter.
I just want to say that all the clips that we showed you today are within the archive of the website.
And so my job is to walk you through a website really quickly, which is basically designed to mirror the chance experience of the I Ching. The layout itself is borrowed from a diagram of the I Ching, the 5 stages of change. And so you spin the coin, and there's that you can get to, and we have no idea what we'll get. So 58. So since we have seen this, let's skip it. We get out of that, and we'll roll the dice or the coin again. Oh, so we have.
There's always a set of thresholds to go through in order to produce the reading for yourself. Each threshold you reach, you have to produce a greater intensity of belief. It's hermeneutic in that sense, like a detective novel or something like that, and then it keeps begging more of you to produce a reading. It's demanding. The I Ching is very demanding. The changing line has a rhetorical function in that it produces yet another level of reading or another layer of reading. So one becomes completely immersed in a surface, which is the first order analysis, and then is given away into an even deeper level of analysis, and then produces a dichotomy, not necessarily opposed, between, in this instance, the notion of compulsion and the notion of retreat. Ambiguity in art is often produced by the juxtaposition of two notions that aren't necessarily opposites, but they are rhetorically somehow composed as opposites. And in that way, then the I Ching does produce something like an aesthetic experience that's very, very close to literature, in fact, poetry more precisely, because one has to navigate the opposition of ideas that aren't necessarily easily reconciled. The interesting thing about the I Ching that I do find mystifying is that I often get the same readings. At particular moments in my life, I will throw it and I will get the same hexagram, you know, at various times. Or some hexagrams occur and then I never get them again for a very long time. This I can't explain, although I think that I'm performing and bringing an enormous amount to it. You know, it is a kind of performance for oneself in a way.
So as the clip ends, the timer will run out, and the user will be taken back to the home page in which they can spin or throw the coins again. So we're going to bypass that. There is a way to do that if you have a faster internet connection, which we seem to do here at the New School. So we can go here and send back to the home page, which every time you return to the home page on Firefox at this time, you will get a different word inside the coin spinning. So here's the search. There's 12 words that we use. We've seen this. So by chance, we've seen this already, so I'm going to skip it again. So here's we access. Okay.
Vulnerability in particular and risk definitely are huge keywords and concepts for us. You know, as I said before, we don't want to focus on women as a vulnerable population or a sector or a marginalized group, you know. That's not a holistic, integrated way to approach a gender perspective, we don't think. Nevertheless, there's reality before us where women are underpaid, excluded from formal markets, excluded from insurance mechanisms, undereducated, undervalued, underrepresented in decision-making spheres. So, you know, we have to walk this tricky line of reflecting reality, but offering ways that it should and must change. And so that's why we talk about two sides of the coin when we're talking about a lot of our key issues, and particularly climate change is a great example that women are among the most vulnerable. They are also agents for change. And we need everyone on board to try to come up with the most innovative and sustainable solutions to these unbelievably catastrophic issues.
So I forgot to mention that on the right-hand side of the site, you can kind of scroll through and see different rollovers. So one of them on top is some of the selection of either saying or from either the I Ching or the interviews, and actually fortune cookies themselves that we collected over the year. Also, the questions that we pose, a selection of the questions that we pose to those interviewers. I don't know if we have time for one more, or what do you think?
We also just want to point out that on the sides are buttons that we sort of use the language of that these buttons take you to the external archive of the world, and the center's coin the spin takes you into the internal archive that we've created. So if you go to the external archive to the U.S. debt clock, which probably all of you have seen, you can just click it.
Okay. Yes. So you can see that the numbers are changing as is live, and so thank you so much for your attention. Do you, or do you want to
okay.
go back?
Really incredibly exciting and just wonderful. Thank you both very, very much. Before we move on to the panel and the other speakers, I thought it might be nice to ask you specifically a few questions about the project. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether someone in the audience already has a question. Yes, please.
I'm just wondering, I used to be involved with the World Future Society in New York City. It was a local chapter, and of course there's a national chapter, it puts out a magazine called The Futurist. I hope you include it in your archives, but either way, and the reason I think it would be very valuable to include in your archives is they have a conference every couple of years. Unfortunately, I think this one was just in July, and I would recommend that you go to one of these conferences and present this information. I think they'd love it. So I think this would be a terrific opportunity. You could find out when by calling World Future Society Bethesda, and I do recommend the Futurist magazine as a place to include that in this archive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes, please, in the back there.
You showed us some wonderful visuals from late 19th century, early 20th century, and I wanted to ask you whether you know of Norman Klein's project, Imaginary 20th Century. We have it right now in our show in Prague, which is called The Future of the Future, so you might check the website of our organization. But I recommend highly Norman Klein's project, where you can find many more, not only visuals, but also wonderful prose and nonfiction.
Yeah. I don't know that project, but I do know of his work, so thank you.
Mitch, yeah.
This is just a question. Thank you. This is just a question for you two as individuals. When you were working on the project and experimenting with different oracles, the I Ching and other things, was there any particularly anomalous or unusual experience that happened to you over the past year while you were working with some of these methods?
I don't have one right now, but
yeah, you
sure. Can I say that?
Of course. I don't know what it is.
Last night we were trying to write a card to thank Karen, and and the card has a message, and we thought, okay, we'll consult the I Ching for the message. And we did that, and we were consulting the I Ching online. And so I clicked on it, and then I clicked to my email, and I had just gotten an email from Karen saying, please bring the I Ching to the presentation tomorrow. The subject was I Ching.
Yes. You told me that you consulted the I Ching before I think you accepted the fellowship, or just at that moment, and that certain things have come true, I believe, in the course of this year, what you were being told and what happens.
We have never consulted the I Ching ever before this project, actually.
Yes.
So it's not like we've been doing this like our whole life.
Yes, that's why we have to invite Greg Bordowitz to speak to us, who is a regular user. One other thing I would add for our own experience is that I discover when Mercury retrogrades, our printer doesn't work. So today it doesn't work. So I'm waiting for tomorrow, when Mercury retrograde is over, that the printer is back to normal before Lana throws it out the window.
And Claudia Butter actually explained that to us, and we had gone to her for a reading of the Change Project. She's an astrologer and a psychoanalyst, and we asked her to do a reading of Change Encounters, and she said she could if we gave her the date and time of its birth. It's in the archive.
It's in there online.
And we have a clip, but I don't know if we'll have time to play it. But.
Basically, the birth date, the time of the email that we were told that we got the fellowship is actually in the house of Cancer, which is Parsh and Scorpio and a bunch of other things that I can't remember, but in the house of Change. So
She is in the audience now, so she could explain it much, much better
Much,
than we
much
can.
better, yes.
So I got the mic over here. I was just curious, in your, I mean, for me it was very interesting, you know, having been one of the interviewees, to hear from people of such different fields. And I was just wondering, in your experience talking to all of these different people, were there any surprising commonalities of the way people talked about change between the fields, and or were there some points of extreme difference that stand out in your mind?
Should I?
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm glad to see you here, Maggie. Thank you for coming. I think the surprising part for me is that everyone is really open to discuss their concept of change from their perspective and how that is envisioned. I think that was really the surprising part and encouraging part for me. Also,
how do you explain that?
I think the way in which we framed the questions was from in really wanting to know from their perspective, from their profession, how change can be seen, and so I think that opens up a discussion, takes it in a different way, in a different side. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think what we discovered is what we anticipated, in the sense that we knew that every discipline has a perspective on change. What was interesting was that every discipline has a very specific vocabulary about how they describe that that position, and that's what I really was fascinated by, I think.
What do you think, or how would you define your own discipline, and what did you bring as visual artist to the project, and what could only happen because you initiated this program and this incredibly complex, immense project that, you know, stopped after a year today, but potentially, of course, could go on much, much, much longer. So I'm kind of curious of what you also said, you know, the goal was to define constructive future thinking. How does an artist fit into such a program?
Well, I always joke that I'm a non-visual visual artist, so I think that my perspective on it as an artist, I wouldn't qualify that as a visual perspective, but I do think that it was always, the heart of it is this multidisciplinarity, and I think that's why I brought up the notion from Michel Foucault, at least as Butler describes Foucault's definition, or his position on transformation, is that it is about the encounter with what is foreign to one's own perspective. So I think that for me as an artist, and I think artists in general have a perspective that incorporates multiple perspectives, particularly that which is kind of one that is foreign to what you are familiar with.
And I think, to borrow Maggie Zellner's words, change is part of learning. And I think as artists, and there's the way we work together, that we are definitely informed by each other's practices. With Lana's background with experimental film and critical cinema, and mine is more object spatially oriented, that we can take each other's strength in terms of research or understanding of medium, space, and materiality and information, and how we each process it differently ourselves.
I would also, just from my own personal history, that I worked for a couple of years with the Merce Cunningham Dance Foundation in the late 80s, early 90s, and I worked on a documentary about John Cage and Merce Cunningham. So that was my first real in-depth experience with the notion of change as an art practice. I mean, I'm sorry. change and chance have just constantly been mixed up throughout this. But the notion of chance operations as a methodology, an artistic methodology, and I had never really been able to totally incorporate that into my art practice. We're both control freaks. So that was one thing that we really had to work on, actually, is how could we actually be open enough to use chance and let ourselves go in the chance operations. So there's, and what I think is interesting about chance operations is it's not random, that you do set definitely control parameters, and then you have to let it go and let chance do its work.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you both very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Claire.
And I'm going to ask the panelists now to come up here and present 4 different presentations. Orit Halpern, who is a professor of history at the Eugene Lang College and the New School for Social Research, is acting as the moderator. She also participated in the project. Didn't get to that page today, but find her when you get home and visit the site yourself.